Hey guys, welcome to the Leadership in the Dealership podcast, where we strive to share the latest and greatest trends shaping automotive with today's thought leaders. I'm your host, Danielle Mills Walden. I'm super excited to be here today with Brian Kramer. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me on, Danielle. I've been looking forward to this.
I know, me too. It's like I can't wait to get back in the lab with you. To kind of kick things off, I'm really kind of curious your response on this. What would you say was the first piece of like technology or a program that really like wowed you when you came into automotive that got you excited about the industry? I figured with all your years of experience, there may have been something that was like, that's interesting. I need to like lean into that more.
No, that's an interesting question. I'm really going to date myself on this, but when I got into the car business, it was at the tail end of 3x5 index cards, and there was no CRM. So CRM was like a new thing that was met with tons of resistance. I still is, right? But I used it as a way to stay organized because I'm like, this is much more efficient than my 3x5 index cards. And I can look out years ahead, 6 months ahead at least, because there's no way I'm going to remember those things. So I used it as a tool and a weapon at the same time. So it gave me a huge competitive advantage versus everybody else that was so mired in the quicksand of what was happening and why is this happening. And I just said, well, I'm going to use it like this and I'm going to make the most of it. And it amplified what I was able to do. Kind of reminds me of AI right now.
Hmm. Wow. 3x5 index cards. Do you still have any of those, by the way?
No, I mean, I still use them with my kids for like flashcards and stuff. But no, you would write down on the back with the headlines and everybody'd say, did you do a follow up? And you'd flip your cards over. Yeah, here's this date. And you'd write it with a pencil. Um, and that was verified phone calls, and most everybody was not like just writing down some dates and not actually making the phone calls. So some things like that don't change all the time, but there was January through December and 31 days, so you would go through as to what day you were going to go through is a horribly inefficient, but it's what we had to do at the time, and that's why follow up didn't happen then, and now it's more of an execution thing because they can't say they don't know. But I would say
Right.
that was the first piece, and then the second one was leasing. Market Scan had a touch screen where you could
Mm.
find. It used to be a longhand sequence with a Sharpie, and you had to know the algebraic equation in your head. And then in 2001, I think, or 2002, there was a touchscreen M pencil, they called it, where you could work all these different scenarios and very quickly calculate payments. And it it changed the whole dynamic of the sales manager's role, because before that you had to be good at math and it was all about control and nobody knew any of that information. So then it became the first step of transparency, which was just inside the dealership. And there was tremendous pushback about that. And you couldn't look, you couldn't come behind the desk. Um, there's still some elements of that in the business that we need to get past, but you can look at all of those things as amplifiers or inhibitors. And either way, whichever way you look at it, you're right, I guess, right?
Yeah, I bet when that first came out, I bet GMs didn't trust it, and they're like, "I'm not sure if this is actually right," and they'd be like trying to fact check it and cross reference, because I see that even today with penciling tools. Did you find that would happen a lot with the
Oh, all the
manager?
time. And it still happens today, as you're saying, with digital retail tools.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they're right because it wasn't mapped correctly. It wasn't set up correctly from the genesis. And it's worth, sharpening the blade a little bit instead of just continuing to saw so
Hmm.
that it is accurate. So you don't have to go back and have that insecurity of, is this right? Well, here, let's double, triple check it. All those things are just paper cuts to death of friction throughout the whole process.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of coming from index cards to leasing, I want to talk about how you guys, when you were the GM of Germain, you were one of the first dealers to really get that process down of like a true digital transaction from A to Z. And that's like going really far in advance. I'm curious from your perspective, did you guys move in that direction because the audience was really asking for this, or because you felt like, hey, this is what we need to do to really kind of separate ourselves? Like, can you walk me through like when did that pivot happen and kind of walk us through like what that looked like?
Well, I wanted to do that ever since I purchased I think it was an iPad or a laptop at an Apple store back in 2011, I think.
Mm.
And or actually, that was my first iPhone. Until then, I had a BlackBerry. So when I checked out and they just handed me the product and emailed me the receipt and there was no paper, it was like such a wow effect. And I thought back then, I'm like, why can't we, imagine if we could do this with cars, how much more often people would transact. And, it took 9 years to actually figure out how to make it happen and trying, I don't know, 10,000 ways that didn't work. But once the technology was all connected, the change management was actually a lot harder
Mm.
because you had different dealership personnel, even great highly engaged employees that just don't like change, that were pushing back or, you know, intentionally or unintentionally sabotaging different things to prove that it didn't work. Even they would ask the customers and they would pull me in. Hey, would you like to buy your whole next car online? They, oh no, I would not. I would absolutely not. But we weren't asking the questions in the right way.
Right.
Because there's a percentage that want to buy it completely online, but there's a very large percentage that want to do elements of a transaction online. And they might want to do, if we say 4 elements, the selection, the credit application, the trade appraisal, and uploading documents. So if you look at those 4 elements, some consumers want to do at least 1, maybe 2, some 3 or 4, and then they still take physical delivery either at their house remotely or in the dealership. But I think that what I see as the biggest misnomer, at least what I disagree with the most, is that everybody wants it to be all or nothing. And they said, look, we're either going digital or we're not. Like it's just linear on-off switch. And it's not like that. It's how do you really know what the customer wants until you're able to offer all those things digitally, that they have the option. And I don't think that everybody wants to do it. Actually, I know they don't. But I do know that everybody wants the option that if they wanted to, that they could.
That's a really good point, because to your point, like so many people think it's all or nothing, and a lot of people just want to decrease the amount of time that they spend at the dealer. They want to be able to do those steps from home or do pretty much everything and just show up and get the car. Did you find that when you were kind of rolling this out, when you had that first example, when somebody did the whole thing seamlessly, like did you really use that as an example to get the buy-in from your store, or how did you leverage that one successful example? I'm sure you remember this person.
No, I remember the person, but it was actually too smooth once we knocked everything out. And then all of a sudden we were advertising how easy it was. And we had a consumer that did select a vehicle online. They worked their own payments and their credit score was what they said it was. They appraised their vehicle and they uploaded all their documents, filled out the credit application. But we didn't have all the behind the scenes, like with Amazon, when you push that button, it says 1 click and it magically shows up at your house the next day. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that aren't magic. There's a lot of hard work behind the scenes that are happening in order to make it look that easy. And we didn't have that infrastructure built at that point. So customer shows up the next morning, somebody else came in as a fresh opportunity that was taking delivery of that vehicle. That's why I'll never forget it, because they,
Yeah.
you know, were, very upset, rightfully so, bought a car from a competitor, an online competitor or actually right in front of our showroom. Now, the good news is that same thing happened to them with our competition. So they came back and they said, we just thought that everybody was further ahead than this. And so I process mapped it, sat down with the client and used that as a case study for where did this break down? We made it right for the customer, but, and then they bought a few more cars from us, but they were okay not negotiating. And I find there's more and more people like that just don't want to deal with the friction. They just want to transact. And I think that by us not giving all that information immediately up front, we're turning people that want to transact into lead gen. And it's that's a real problem in the industry.
It is. There's still, I know you travel over the country, you work with dealers from everywhere, and there's still so many dealers who believe that their customer base wants to negotiate, wants to get to the lowest price. And there's, obviously customers like that, but there's still so many people out there who want a frictionless experience where they can do as much as possible and not have to worry about things changing on them in the last minute. So like by you kind of using that case study as an example to really make your process better, without that example, you guys may have assumed like, oh, we have this down packed, when really like there are some areas of opportunity. I'm curious for you, Brian, like if you had to give advice to a dealer who wants to kind of go in this direction, but they're apprehensive about like, how will I get my team to buy in? How do we change this process? What do we need to do? Like from a leadership standpoint, what are some things that you did with your stores that helped them buy in and help change things so that it could be successful?
Well, a lot of it's similar to what we're doing. I'm learning now on this side as the vendor with Accu-Trade is not trying to make everybody do it. And you've got to find the early adopters or the innovators that want to do it to go first to show everybody else that it's safe, because there's a lot more people that I'm realizing this more and more every day that don't want to blaze that trail because it's scary and it's risky, and things could get worse and break things when everything's not that bad, and that's scary for a lot of people. So I would find a small group, which is what done in every dealership, and what you're choosing, with dealers that are more far ahead, because it's not, the appraising trades with Accu-Trade is not the easiest thing in the world, and digital retail is not easy either. And anybody that thinks you can just switch it like a widget on a website, it's not that easy, because you have to, what happens when this manager, and you have two managers that are diametrically opposed, and one of them says they're not going to honor it and somebody says that they are, or this,
Mhm.
everything matched up exactly the way the client said it's going to happen. Is that going to take precedent over a customer that showed up off the service drive? And which one's more important? Is it time stamped? Is there all those processes in place? And I would start just by going, it's no different than the road to the sale. It's just the digital road to the sale. So if somebody comes in your showroom and they don't select the vehicle, manager wants somebody to talk to the customer. If they don't appraise their car, find out why they didn't appraise their vehicle. They want to submit credit, find out why they didn't. And I don't, when on that online journey, I don't think that people will sit there and look, why are 38% or 64% of my customers bouncing at this step? Why don't I get more resources applied to it and figure that out? Like with us, my previous life, we saw everybody was bouncing at the trade appraisal.
Mm.
So it's very easy to take a confirmation bias, as my managers did, and they say, see, people want to come in and they want to physically get their car appraised, and they want a range, they don't need an exact value. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And how do we know until we actually, and they were right. It was like, I don't know, only 6% were completing it at that point. So I had to go through the customer's lens and try to mystery shop ourselves over and over again. And I said, well, I'm taking it off site to a form fill, and it's taking us away. So when we embedded it and made it more of like a native API, so that all the data that was input would flow through into the CRM and make the salespeople's lives easier, so they didn't have to duplicate work. Then all of a sudden, everybody just started using that process. Same thing with the credit application. When the credit app actually populated Route One and the CRM, so now the salespeople, that's another part of their job they don't have to do. The customer's now doing their paperwork and kind of closing out the deal. And the customer always puts in their two references. They put in their previous address. They don't skip all these things that they don't think are important. They just fill all the fields out. They're actually, the best at doing paperwork, and
Mhm.
they select the right VIN number, and they put their miles in correctly, and all the other things that go along with it, right? They double check their VIN number. And we found that 26% of the customers would go all the way through to the upload documents and set an appointment without any interaction from a salesperson. So a lot of people at the end were like, well, this is a threat. And I said, well, or you could look at it as an enabler, so you can sell twice as many cars because the customer's doing half your paperwork. But the most interesting thing of that whole journey was a third of our sales staff was at that time still less than 26% appointment set rate. So
Mm.
what they were doing was worse than no interaction whatsoever. So whatever questions they were asking were irrelevant to the customer's journey. They're asking price questions, down payment questions that don't need to be asked, that are just something they're curious about to see if they're wasting their time,
Right.
rather than just letting the customer guide the journey themselves. And I look at it like taekwondo versus jujitsu. You should use the client's momentum and the energy. And as long as you be like more like a Sherpa and guide them through the process, you don't have to force them through it.
Wow, that must have been crazy seeing how like if the customer had no interaction, they were moving further in the process than if by way of the team getting in touch with them and probably trying to treat that customer like any other customer, that was creating like a friction point. That must have been really interesting to see, and to be able to show the team like, hey guys, this is what's happening here. um
It
that
was
kind
hard to
of,
get them to see it.
oh,
And
I'm
as we would walk through the correspondence, I said, "Do you see why this is happening now? Because you were asking a question that they already had answered, and that doesn't need to be asked, and you're asking things that are contradictory to what they're trying to accomplish, and you're just using a standard word track that is generic, and that's not personalized. It's not authentic or genuine. So that's why they're not coming in." And I think that that's just one example that was quantified. If there's a way to quantify it across the country, I'm guessing it's a huge problem.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that kind of brings me back to, when we talk about leadership and process, I know that you spent, decades of your career on the dealer side as a GM, and then you've, more so recently moved over into the vendor partner side, and you're rolling out new systems and products with, dealers across the country. And I'm curious from your perspective now, being on this side of it, seeing how you may have a phenomenal conversation with a dealer principal or an owner about the solution, but then when it comes to actually, you know implementing it with the team, if they're not connected to it or they're not brought into those conversations, you can see things like derail. So I'm curious from your perspective, now seeing it from this side of it, what have you learned and what have you noticed as you're traveling to these different dealers to see like who's a good fit, and how do you encourage everybody to kind of be on the same page?
Well, initially I made the mistake of assuming that, like the stores that I came out of, there was a high level of trust, and I trusted my managers to do what they did, and they trusted me to make these decisions, and I would bring them in at the end and say, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking. Poke holes in this. If not, I'm moving forward with it." And I initially was taking that from some high-ranking group decision makers that absolutely have the authority and can, or the dealer themselves that can do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, "Okay, I'm going to sign this up." So we would sign it up, kick it off with them, or they give us the point, the POC, point of contact. And what I learned very quickly is everybody has to be involved in these kickoffs. And if you don't, from the top leadership on down, because it's not just technology you're changing. This is change management. And that requires top level buy-in. And, I had a conversation this morning with someone, and they said, "Yeah, let's go ahead and move forward." I said, "Hold on. I need to have your used car director involved. I need to have the marketing director involved. I need to have the BDC director involved." And they said, "They'll be fine with it." I said, "Right, but if they don't know what their piece of the puzzle is prior to that, they're going to get overwhelmed." I've now seen this, over and over again. If everybody doesn't know what their role is, they all think they have to boil the ocean, and it's overwhelming and daunting. And then when it doesn't work, or when they kick it off, they're like, "Well, this wasn't my idea. This was that person's idea." And I mean, I guess I'll do this as the next flavor of the week until we figure something else out. So I've learned, and our team has learned, to be very, very clear up front as to this is not easy. And this is not, a set it and forget it, easy bake oven type deal. This takes work and participation from both parties. And it's not an overnight thing. It's not one, switch. It's a progression of a foundational piece. You can't just fast forward to the end to where everything just works. One Lego piece, connects to another one. And if it's not done correctly in that same sequence, it comes tumbling down. And I missed that early on.
Yeah, I bet you like when you're when you're pushing back on some of these decision makers, they're probably initially like taken back, like, well, I'm so used to a vendor when I talk to them and I give them the green light, we're going to move forward. They're like, oh, here's the contract, and they're just trying to close the deal. Whereas you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of, I need this to be a success. It's more than just getting you signed up. I want that long-term adoption where this is so ingrained in your process, it becomes your DNA. In order for that to happen, everybody's got to be on board. And I resonate with that so much, with rolling out so many things with dealers across the country and experiencing that. And I find it so interesting that you recognize that super early and you're experiencing that on your side of things. I'm really curious. I know that a lot of our listeners probably didn't get a chance to hear your talk at NADA, and everybody was buzzing about it. Can you maybe give us, some of the highlights of kind of what you talked about there? And, we'd love to hear.
So there'll be more updates to come on that. But we, we talk about vehicle acquisition and obviously the different channels of acquisition, which there's nothing new. I think it might be new to some dealers with using QR codes and virtual appraisals and more modern service drive acquisition techniques. But the big news was the inventory intelligence platform
Mm.
that we rolled out. So it's going to be going live in end of Q2, early Q3, and we've got a few dealers that are on a pilot program signed up. I think 25, 30 dealers at NADA to be on the next phase of the pilot. But what it does is it manages risk rather than managing age. And what that means is that if you've got 100 cars in stock, the cars that are 3 or 4 days old might be the most at risk, the highest depreciation, the highest days on market. And our tool determines that from day one rather than waiting until day 60 to say, oh, you might want to consider getting rid of this vehicle. So it's almost like you can avoid accidents ahead of time and save thousands of dollars in the process by not waiting 60 days and knowing on day one what's going to happen. It'll also tell the dealer what day they're going to run out of margin. If it's the 34th day, 29th day on each vehicle. And instead of looking at reports and dashboards like I have my whole career, it's actually using, RPA and some large language model intelligence to be able to tell the dealer not just what the numbers are, but what to do with the numbers. So if you've got, one example was we had a dealer that had 11 vehicles that were over 7% VDP conversion and more than 5 leads in less than 24 hours. So that's a trigger that they underpriced the vehicle. So
Mm.
not only will we tell them to lower prices or to, optimize merchandising, but in that instance, we suggested that they raise prices because they were 25% less than we felt they should be on that particular trim model year. So they, in many cases, we'll tell them to raise it if the market conditions dictate that. So we're trying to be the opposite of a race to the bottom and using intelligence to be able to guide dealers through smarter decisions, more of like a financial planning website, managing performing versus underperforming or at risk portfolios, doing the same thing with their inventory buckets.
Well, I'm sure I bet like for any used car manager or any, manager who would be utilizing this, they would see a lot of benefit to that because they're so used to you just seeing data kind of thrown at them from like the Viatos of the world, but not really getting the action step of like what to do next with it. And if it can, predict things and say like, hey, if you do this, this could happen, they're going to be, maximizing where they would have missed out. And you mentioned that like a lot of times people are pricing the vehicles too low and they shouldn't be. But wow, I'm interested to see like how that all shakes out because it sounds like that's something that everybody's gonna really want because who doesn't want to like leave money on the table? Like they're gonna want to take advantage of that.
And work less. We've got a Chat GPT enabled merchandising custom comment builder.
Mm.
So that's going to save used car managers, 4, 6, 8 hours a week of staying up like I used to till midnight pricing car, verifying all the merchandising. Just goes into AI and creates the, SEO optimized format for merchandising text that's appealing to Google and Chat GPT and Google Bard and everybody else in between. But the other exciting thing is that with our platform, if you're on Dealer Inspire websites, you have a Cars.com marketplace account, and you have AccuTrade, when you change a price, so let's say the situation we were talking about earlier, there was a deposit on the vehicle, it will update in real time. You don't have to
Mm.
wait till the server updates at 1 a.m., the following day. As the transactions are happening, as long as you're on our platform, it's now updating in real time. So it will say sale pending, or based on whenever that deal is delivered or sold pending or sold booked, whatever the trigger is, it'll be real time like it is in every other e-commerce environment. And that's that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome in digital retail is real time updates with your inventory status for people that are out of town and driving in from 3 hours away.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be really, really important. I'm curious from your perspective, as you're looking at valuations, what would you say has been like the biggest difference you're seeing now in 2024 with January compared to what we were seeing in 2023 with the vehicle valuations?
So I'd say it's depending on the OEM. You know, the domestics and Stellantis are have a higher day supply, and obviously the EVs with most of the manufacturers as it gets higher. But there's also some really good values within the EVs. So I would say it's VIN specific and model specific because 2019 and 2020 Ford Lightnings right now are actually a pretty high scarcity in a really low demand or really low average days on market, whereas a 2022 is the opposite of that. It's 136 days on market, and I think it's a 270 market day supply. So it could be even the same vehicle, just different model years or what was built that year. But I think the scariest thing I see is the aging.
Mm,
33% of the inventory right now is over 60 days old in the US, which
wow.
that number was in the high teens just 45 days ago, and 22% of it is over 90 days old, which is a really scary number. So
Yeah.
that's where, because most cars are going to run out of their margin at 34 days. So now there's a lot of hope, but there's not a lot of transactions happening. So one of the biggest things that we look at is what didn't sell, not just what did.
Okay. Well, based on with you saying that, I'm really curious your perspective on this. So, a lot of the dealers we work with across the country, now that we're not in pandemic times and now there's more inventory, there's more cars on the lot, there's been some dealers who've been really pushing back and saying, "Oh, we don't need this digital retailing. We don't, customers are coming in now. We have inventory." Like, what would you tell a dealer who thinks that now that we're not in these pandemic times where you had to pre-order all the inventory and sell it before they got there, that this is going to be something that is going to continue on and it's going to change, but it's going to be here. Like there's so many people that still feel like, oh, okay, well, we can just go back to the way we were doing it and not look at the progression that we took.
Well, obviously, Amazon's doing some business with Hyundai. And I would say that if you look at their track record in other verticals, they're pretty disruptive.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that I talk to that like, well, they're just doing a lead gen. Um, I don't see them just being okay. That's just me. But I always prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And you digital retail is not something you just flip a switch on. It's a cultural change. It's a mindset. I would be working in two different spaces. And the dealerships that I see that are the best at this have a skunkworks project, and they'll have a team of two or three, just like how internet teams started out or service drive acquisition teams start out. And at least have two or three people that know how to handle express purchase and use it as a petri dish to experiment, even if you just have hourly people doing it, so that you can work the bugs out. Because when you need to do it, it's going to the tipping point in this disruption will happen quick, just like it did during COVID, and something like that will happen again. And when it happens, nobody wants to get, you know, you want to make sure your systems are all integrated so that you can flip the switch. Let's say you're not going to go, full bore right now. You at least need to work out the bugs and the kinks in the system with your process for as a dry run, like a fire drill. And if you don't, it's going to be very painful. I know that when COVID hit, it was, obviously nobody wanted that to happen, but for us, it was a huge market share grab, and we were built for that. So while everybody else was figuring out what to do, we were just accepting all the inventory from the OEM. We turned down nothing. We kept buying, used car inventory on the way down, and then we had it when nobody else did. You want to be able to go on offense in times like that, not be on defense and waiting to see what everybody else is going to do. You want to be the trailblazer, the market leader, because that's when you really grab share.
No, that's a really good point. Um, I remember, during those times, you were really speaking about how your store was doing such a great job of acquiring other people's trades and using that as as a funnel that you could always leverage. Where a lot of people were having to go to auction, doing other things. You're like, guys, there's so many trades that we're not even taking advantage of that we could be leveraging. So that's a really really good point. But
The best performers don't advertise price anymore. They're advertising that experience. And that anybody who's concerned about margin compression or market share or anything like that, if you're profitability, if you're worried about those things, then you should be focused on the experience, because the data clearly states that clients are willing to pay more for a better experience. We see it all the time. So if you're not offering that, you're also not maximizing your profitability, because there is a stream of customers like Amazon Prime that aren't going to question the price. They're just going to, or DoorDash or Uber Eats, nobody's negotiating with them or asking which one of these is less. They just, they do it out of convenience. And there's that convenience market is growing faster than any other part of the business. And that's something that everybody needs to be getting their unfair share of, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you, 1,000%. I'm curious from your perspective, since you travel all over the country, you work with dealers, all different sizes, all different OEMs, different markets. Um, every episode, we like to kind of put a spotlight on a dealer that has really stood out by way of the leadership that they have, the processes that they've been implementing, and also technology that they've embraced. And I'm curious from your perspective, is there one dealer that you may want to shout out, and why? Because I think that you'd have like a really cool perspective on that.
There's a ton of really innovative, scrappy dealers, and there's the ones that everybody knows, and Paragon Honda is the first one that comes to mind because I just was fortunate to attend their next 5-year planning meeting for strategy,
Mm,
and I was just part of something similar with Sonic Automotive. But I would say, in my opinion, one of the most innovative that's out there is Peter Bulwer, Toyota, and
Lord.
he's in Tallahassee, Florida, a town of I think 17,000, and he's doing amazing things. He's acquiring 100 and something cars a month off the service drive, growing his service business, going digital. Everything's customer first. He's doing some really unorthodox things that are working out for him and working out for him really well. And it's just you know improving his culture. He has a 4-day work week for salespeople
Wow.
and for most dealership employees, and he was and it works, and it works really well, and his turnover is negligible. So, and he's doing it differently than Paragon's doing it, or he's doing it differently than Sonic's doing it. And I think that's what's really cool is I get to see all of these different innovators innovating in different ways. It's really cool to see from the outside looking in. But I think the most impressive thing as I think about it is the fact that they're planning out, you know, 3 years, 5 years, not just 30 days or, 3 days. I mean, they're really, they still have that goal and that sense of urgency going, but the best are looking around corners. Okay, where do we want to be, 3 years from now? What should that look like? What's the landscape? What's the EV percentage going to look like? What's the mix? How many, it's coming, right? It's already here. And then 5 years from now, what should it look like? And what should our process look like? And what's going to change? How do we need to grow our fixed ops business and rental car business and things like that? And if I say this for all the dealers because I'm fortunate enough I get to see what's going on. I'm not going to share their proprietary information, but if a dealer is wondering what it should look like, they need to start planning it because if not, there's a bunch of other dealers that I'm not mentioning that are in rooms that are coming up with amazing ideas, and they're going to be competing with those dealers in 2 years or 3 years when they come back all revamped and reinvented. And that's when there's probably going to be a lot more consolidation if they don't figure that out.
Wow, that's a really good point. I wanted to spend 2 seconds to talk about that 4-day work week because I feel like he's addressing a couple different pain points that have been brought up in the industry. Number one is like, we have to work these crazy hours. We don't have days off. We're working 7 days a week. So by way of him doing that, I'm sure he's getting his retention is up from his staff because they are feeling like they're supported. And I'm sure like maybe some of them maybe want to come in more or maybe don't, but I don't know if you work with them closely, but how long have they been doing that, and has it been getting really good reception? Because I've never heard of that in the auto industry, and that's really like that's very pioneerish for him to to be doing that. That sounds really cool.
I mentioned that to him when I was still in retail, and he came down to our dealership in Naples to check out the service drive process. And he said, "What do you think is next?" And Wendell Hardy, who's the GM there now, he
Mhm.
said, "You know what I'd love more? My dream is to figure out how to do a 4-day work week." And Peter goes, "Oh yeah, we do that." I go, "You do that now?" He goes, "Yeah, I've been doing it for a couple of years. Best thing we ever did." He goes, "I can attract from a much larger labor pool. I can go after Florida State college grads. I can attract just a higher caliber of person. Yeah, and they're going to get 3 days off, and there's some balance. Well, how do you do this?" And that's where the real learning takes place. And in that situation, that's where I see most of the stuff break down with digital retail, appraisals, acquisition, 4-day work weeks. Is you get two different mindsets there. Well, that might work there, but it won't work in this town because of blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And Whereas one and I leaned in and we're like, so how do you do this? Or how do you handle their customers when they're off the other 3 days? How does that, oh, they pair up with somebody else. They've got like
The
a real
buddies.
estate partner. And they both have each other's back so that they don't break that down because it's a privilege and you could lose it. And nobody wants to be the person that messes that up because it is something that's special, and that's why people don't leave because okay, let's say they get recruited down the street. Oh, do you have a 4-day work week? Well, no, nobody does that. Okay, well then I'm out. And it doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter at that point. And you can't recruit his people. He also
Wow.
empowers them all to appraise cars, the whole staff. So if anybody tries to recruit them, well, can I appraise cars? Well, no, we don't. You can't do that. You're in sales. You can't pull payoffs. You can't work 4-day work week. Okay, well, I'm never going to leave Peter Boulware.
That is so fascinating. I'm so glad that you shared them as the example because it sounds like they're doing some really innovative things and really like, pushing the needle in what is possible in automotive. These are things that even tech companies have talked about and some have tried to implement and then some don't. But like the fact that this dealer is doing this and doing it successfully is just really, really
He's
awesome.
not automotive. Obviously, he's an NFL football player, and didn't he told me, where you come up with these ideas? He goes, I'm just a businessman. I'm not a car guy. He said, I'm just looking at it from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
and sometimes a fresh set of eyes is all you need.
Oh, it's the best to come in. But in closing, I'd love to find out from you, what is like your bold prediction for 2024 of where you see the industry going? I know that's really broad, but I'm curious from your perspective.
Well, I just think AI is going to get embedded into everything, and it's just going to be part of. It's happening already, right? With follow up templates, improving the quality of everything, and I think that this needs to be the year that dealers start letting go of the micromanagement types of control and start controlling the things that matter. And I think that, I used to be like this, but many people are guilty of trying to control everything. And I think that it's very important to know, like schedules, right? That you don't have to control all those things. And by giving autonomy out and trusting your people and hiring the right people and slowing down your hiring process, that you can get so much more done exponentially and you can focus on the most important things, which is recruiting, developing, training, promoting, and retaining talent and connecting with humans more. And I think that AI will allow that to happen for those that are willing to let go of it and let it make their lives easier, which is going to be everybody eventually. And there's going to be some push pull at the beginning, but um, that's I think there's going to be a huge differentiation, and I think that the innovative dealers are going to continue to grow. Whereas I go down many like I'm sure you do, Danielle. And one side of the street, I'm at one dealership. They're telling me how bad the market is and how everything's going the wrong way and can't find people. And I go right across the street to another group, and they're breaking records and colossograms, and they're high fiving, and you can just feel it the second you walk into the showroom,
Yep.
the energy, and that's what I see is the dealers that are rocking are going to rock even more, and the ones that are trying to figure it out, if they don't start seeking solutions, that they're going to have margin compression, and it's going to get tougher, and they're going to have to cut staff, and um, it's a choice. I know a lot of people don't agree with me on that, but I truly believe that.
No, I believe that too. I think everything is tied to leadership, and you really kind of tied that all in together. That the right leadership and guidance of the store, the right decisions that they're making, trusting in the technology is going to ultimately put you in the right on the right side of the street when everything comes to fruition. But thank you so much, Brian, for coming here and sharing all of your truths with us. We really appreciate it.